All right. Josh, thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'm excited to have you here. How you doing?
Yeah, you bet. Doing pretty well.
Awesome. So we're going to talk real estate, business, maybe a little podcast stuff. But let's
Okay.
start just learning a little bit more about you and how you kind of got started into the business world.
Yeah, so I would say my journey was probably pretty boring up until I moved to Colorado. Once I moved to Colorado, everything kind of started. I was in the military and I was active duty Army, and I got stationed out here in Colorado. And at the time, I was kind of going through like a divorce, and I officially had like the chains off, so I was able to buy a house. There's like a lot of restrictions that she didn't want to do. So now that she wasn't part of the picture, just bought my first property, lived with some
Hmm.
guys up in Manitou in the mountains, and
Sweet.
had this property downtown. And I was like, well, I'm not going to be living in it, but I got all this stuff. So
Mhm.
took all the stuff, furnished the house, and then started renting it on Airbnb. And
Okay.
that was kind of like how the journey, everything pretty much kicked off.
Sweet. So you like house hacked it, but didn't fully house hack it because you never lived in the property?
Right. Yeah. I never lived in the house. So I
Uh-huh.
rented out another house to some other guys for real cheap. And then my
Uh-huh.
primary residence was a full time Airbnb.
Oh, okay. And what year was this? Were there any laws around Airbnbs back then?
Um, so they trying to think, they didn't have anything with like permits or anything yet. I
Mhm.
think they started once I was like a year or two in, but I think it was right around like 2018 is that when I
Okay.
got the house and then started renting
Hmm.
it. And I think all that stuff kicked in 2019.
Hmm. And did you do it as like a full one unit, or was it rent by the bedroom Airbnb?
Yeah. So it was, well, so we did the full place. It was like a 3 bedroom, 1 bath house. And then when I bought it, I renovated and put a whole bathroom in like a closet to make it a second. So that's
Okay.
what kind of like really helped it out.
Uh-huh. And it did pretty well for you to where you're like, yeah, I'd do it again.
Yeah, so it's kind of wild. Interesting story. So I was at the range, and I remember this kind of like it was yesterday. But I was at the range one day with some guys, and
Hmm.
our units were, shooting, qualifying, and stuff. And I was sitting in
Hmm.
the tower, and I just remember I got like 3 messages within the course of like 5 minutes, and it's like, "Hey, $600, $1,200, $900." And I just remember taking my phone and seeing those messages, and I turned and looked at like one of my buddies next to me. I was like, "Check this out! I just made like 3 grand," and they were all looking at me, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I just started telling them about Airbnb. So that was like one of the first things I remember. I was just renting out an Airbnb and started making a ton of money. And
Uh-huh.
it was pretty easy. It was smooth. Didn't seem like there were any problems. Everything was really really easy. Like right in the beginning, it was nice.
Hmm. You didn't have any challenges with guests, or did you do all the cleanings yourself, or did you hire that out?
Yeah, so I think I did like one or two cleanings myself just to get started, but then it gets to be like really inconsistent to where if you got a full time job or you got something where you got to be at
Hmm.
a place that's not cleaning a house, you got to find someone else to do it. So I ended up finding another lady, and she would do it for like a fixed fee per clean, so
Hmm.
$50 a clean, I think, is where that started. And she was with me. It was just one lady. She was with me for like a year.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Yeah, it
And
was
so
pretty easy.
did this lead towards getting another property after that, or you just hold this one for a little bit? And do you still
Yeah,
have
so
this
I
one today?
Yeah, I do. Yep, I still have
Hmm.
it, and it's still rented out. It's still going on Airbnb. It's not
Hmm.
doing as well as it did
Hmm.
when I first started, which is kind of surprising. But I don't know. There's some things that I'm trying to like figure out with like is management like the right option and other things because
Hmm.
I'm not doing anything with it anymore.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I had that property, and then I ended up deploying within like the first year and a half or so of being here. And when I came back, then I bought a second one. So it was like, got here, bought first one, deployed, came back, bought the second one. And then
Hmm.
there was a couple apartment condos between here and there that I'd buy and then rent out, but I've sold those since. But
Hmm.
yeah, that's really what kind of like started everything off was that first property. And then I just kind of kept the ball rolling after that.
Was it always here in Colorado Springs, or did you ever think of going out of state or into a different market wherever you were stationed?
Yeah, so I was only stationed here when I got to the point where I was buying real estate. I did try and do it back when I was in Georgia, but like I
Hmm.
said, I was married at the time and she didn't want to. She's very like risk adverse and
Hmm.
stuff. So a lot of things that I wanted to do kind of didn't happen. But um once I got out here, I started, kind of had
Hmm.
the training wheels off and could do whatever I wanted. So I didn't have the opportunity, I'll say, to do
Hmm.
it elsewhere. But once I got out here, I started doing that, and it just one thing rolled into another and started to kind of expand. But I have like an interesting rule of thumb, and my thing is like you have to buy real estate next to something that you cannot take away. So a river,
Hmm.
a stream, a mountain, a lake, an ocean, right? Something like that. If you can do that, generally you're going to be in a pretty stable market. And
Hmm.
if the market goes up or the market goes down, you can probably weather the storm a lot better than like, anywhere Nebraska, right?
I agree. I agree. And
Yeah.
Colorado, the mountains, you have mountains and streams and like the woods and everything all kind of mixed into one, which makes it like
Mhm.
a great spot to invest.
Yeah.
Let's back up to where you first started and how did you get the idea like I'm gonna do a short-term rental, I'm gonna buy this property and start renting it out in the first place?
Yeah. So it was, I had a bunch of stuff from my marriage, and I could basically furnish a house with all the stuff I have.
Hmm.
And I had nowhere to put it because I was going to move in with some guys.
Hmm.
It was a tough situation. It was like an affair that I found out about right before we moved, and basically like left without her. So I was
Hmm.
going through a hard time, and one of my buddies at that time was he told me, he's like, dude, you need to live with somebody. Like being alone's not a good thing right now. So
Hmm.
I had all this stuff that used to fill a house that I
Hmm.
didn't have anywhere to put it. So I just put it in this house that I bought, and
Hmm.
that's what like that's what kicked everything off. So I didn't really have an intention
Yeah.
of renting it as a short-term rental. It was kind of
Okay.
just like it was like, here's the conditions that I have. What is
Uh-huh.
the solution that I can come up
Uh-huh.
with, right?
Yeah. Huh. Because I feel like you looked at that a lot differently than someone else would. They just be like, oh, I'm just going to sell all of my furniture and not use it to kind of add value to a property to make me more money instead of buying a property and renting out long term.
Yeah.
Hmm. So you get this property, you get a couple more. Did you ever start like settling down on real estate, or did you start another business once you got the rentals going? What was your next step?
Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of feel like real estate is, I mean, if you look at all the major players, right? You look at like the Warren Buffetts of the world or the Elon Musk or whatever, it's like, what's like something that they have in their portfolio outside of like businesses or stocks or anything? What's like one thing that they always like fall back on? And,
Hmm.
Jeff Bezos has got what, 14 properties all over the world that are just beautiful mansions. He's got a yacht, right? So
Hmm.
it's like he's got real estate. Um, you look at Bill Gates and they talk about, I just saw a post just the other day about like this house that he has that he's selling. It's worth, 100 something million. And it's like, okay, all these people have one like type of wealth vehicle in common, and it's real
Hmm.
estate. So I've always thought, well, you can do business, own businesses and run businesses. You could have a job. You can, be invested in the stock market and stuff. While you have all these other vehicles, it's like, I feel like you should always dump something into real estate,
Hmm.
because that's going to be like the long term play, is like always building up that net wealth. It never depreciates. I should say never depreciates, but it's one of those things that will always be up the long time.
Hmm.
Like the longer you wait, the longer your time horizon, the higher the differential will be, right?
Hmm.
So
So did you always do short-term rentals or were your condos and stuff long-term rentals?
yeah, so the condos were long term. That's actually a good question.
Hmm.
The condos were long term. I had two condos right downtown Colorado Springs, super nice,
Hmm.
really cool places.
Yeah.
Um, so those were long term just because they were generally in an HOA or some sort of like restricted environment to where you couldn't.
Hmm.
Um, those were, and then when I was deployed, I did switch my first property into a long term. I put a tenant in there while I was
Hmm.
deployed, so I wouldn't have to deal with like
Okay.
cleanings and fixing stuff and all that.
Hmm. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And did you buy all of these? Like, were you doing 20% down, or would you do something creative to get these properties?
Yeah. So when I first started, I didn't know anything about creative anything. So I, so being a veteran, I had access to a VA loan. So I think it was like $17,000 or something that I had available to me. And I was able to secure the property for like 3 grand. So
Hmm.
I think it was like 300,000, and I put 3 grand down, and that really just covered like closing costs and like some ancillary things. But for the most part, it was like a 0% down loan. I got a VA loan. Then I took what I did have saved up, that 18,000 or whatever, and I dumped it into just like renovating and adding like that extra bathroom, making the bedrooms a little bit bigger and kind of
Mm-hmm.
like doing some little updates. And that's really, and then some furnishing and stuff. But I really like, I was able to, with the first property, put like almost nothing down and put all that into the renovation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then you're right. As we got into the next ones, yeah, I think I put 20% down on my second one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I did a seller finance the third one. So it was a condo. It was right above the rabbit hole. I don't know if you know where that's at,
I do
but
know the rabbit hole. Yeah, that's a good spot.
so it was right third floor, right above the rabbit hole. It was a really cool location. I was renting that, and I rented it for a year, and then convinced the owner to
Mm-hmm.
allow me to kind of buy it. And he did, but the problem was I was in such a tight financial spot. I couldn't like find a way to get the property. My VA
Mm-hmm.
loan was tied up on another one. I didn't have 20%
Yeah.
down. So I was kind of like, how the heck am I going to pull this off? So what I ended up doing was I got in touch. There was a an agent that I was close with, and he knew of somebody that had the cash to essentially buy it. So
Mm-hmm.
he put his realtor commission in as part of it. So he got 1/3. This
Mm-hmm.
lender, this private money lender, put in the rest of the capital to buy it, and then I pretty much brought the deal. So each of us got a third,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
and the only requirement was that we have to turn around and flip it within 30 days.
Okay.
So I
Gotcha.
never really got to like live in it as an owner, but we
Mm-hmm.
did end up technically buying it and then selling it for a premium, just because
Okay.
when I when I first signed the lease, I worked in, like was that a lease? What do they call that when you like own
A lease
your,
option.
yeah, so I could like
Yeah.
buy the property at the end of
Yeah.
it.
So it's like a
So
lease with the option to buy or option to
right,
purchase.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we pretty much settled on the purchase price and all that stuff when I signed the lease, and then 12
Mm-hmm.
months later we ended up buying it. So
Okay. Mm-hmm.
we ended up making some money on it, but I never really
Hmm.
like lived there.
Yeah.
So
So was it kind of like, was that your first fix and flip, kind of in a weird way?
in a weird way, there was no fixing that was done,
Yeah.
right? It was just I
Yeah.
took advantage of like appreciation over the course of 12 months and was able to sell
Uh-huh.
it in month 13,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
you know. But um trying to think, then the next property after that was one that I did with my father, and he had a HELOC on his primary,
Mm-hmm.
and we used that to put the 20% down to purchase the property together. He did 50%, and then I was the owner operator, and I had
Mm-hmm.
50% equity.
Yeah.
And then the what was the fifth or sixth property we did was this 4 unit property that we're working on right now trying to sell. And
Uh-huh.
that never was intended to be a fix and flip. That was always going to be a fix and hold. But
Mm-hmm.
given the market situation and where things are, it
Mm-hmm.
the hard, like, there's the refinancing option to get out of the hard money just is not working.
Mm-hmm.
I
So is this your, so you haven't done an official fix and flip, but you've done a lot of fixing and flipping, but just separately, it seems like.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I like to hold my real estate just because every time you hold, you're kind of like adding to your bottom line, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
just increasing your income. And there's a lot of appreciation just by buying a property, fixing it up, and then holding on to it for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to realize that I think there's more wealth generated in holding property than there is in like trying to either get cash flow from the rent or trying to sell it right away.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big fan of HELOCs. Once you get the property, hold it for a year or so, put a HELOC in place, and then use that to, buy the next one or move forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. What's your rehab experience has been like? Have you had any major challenges with that?
Yeah. So probably like everybody, we started off. I have a buddy who's kind of like gone through the same journey with me. He's got real estate and stuff out here too. And we started off with like I think there's like phases, right? Like there's the baseline phase, which is like the local handyman that you meet somehow from somebody else that like remodeled their bathroom, and you ask him and he's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
can do it. And it's always dirt cheap.
Yeah.
And he's always got his own truck and it's rinky dink and he's using his own tools and stuff. And it's just like a real hack job, right? So we started there. that got us through one project, but then of course like the prices change and like there's always all these add-ons and stuff. It's like all over the place. And then that relationship eventually like just deteriorates after like the first project. Then you have kind of the next phase. And I
Hmm.
think that's like a team or a couple of guys, but they're not like very well rated and they're not super professional. They're more professional than the one guy at the bottom, but like these guys are
Yeah.
still kind of like of the same caliber in a way. So I've done that, and that was with this 4 unit property that we have right now, and that's how
Hmm.
I started. So I did 2 units, whereas I was the GC, and I had these guys running kind of like the renovation, and ended up finishing like the framing and stuff with
Hmm.
them. And then I was like, you guys got to go. Like this, it was just like one of those things where they said they'd be done at a certain time, and they never were. And then it was like they may add on cost because they're working additional
Hmm.
hours, and it's over schedule and stuff. And it's like
Hmm.
finish the work for what it is. I'm not paying you guys anymore. Like we're done. So
Hmm.
that was kind of the end of that. And now I'd say we're kind of like at phase 3 where it's like we will only work with licensed professionals that, will
Hmm.
stick to a schedule and get stuff done on time the right way. So come a long way in the last 5 years of doing these renovations and fixes on properties. And we're finally, I think, at that final stage of like, we will not work with anybody that's not licensed, not insured, doesn't have a professional crew, can't like
Hmm.
pull their own permits and put their own stuff in place. Like
Hmm.
just not spending the time, not anymore.
Yeah. What's the Is there a premium that you're willing to pay now since you're only going to work with a properly licensed general contractor?
Yeah, so there's a couple aspects I think to that question. And the first one is when you don't work with like the licensed guys, you kind of like I think you see money as it's coming out of your own pocket, and it's tough to come
Hmm.
by and stuff like. And that's kind of what sets the budget so low. And I think why those guys are such a fruitful option for you at the time. But when
Hmm.
you get to this tier, one thing that we've done, and we're doing this now with a commercial property. I forgot about that. With the commercial property that we have, but you can always secure financing, right?
Hmm.
So it's like you kind of don't think about that, or you don't really realize it, or maybe you just don't even know how. But like we got a hard money lender that provided us all of the construction costs that we'd need.
Hmm.
So it was like the builder put together the list of everything that's going to be in the quote. They said, hey, here's the estimation plus like whatever their extra percentages and stuff are for contingencies. And then we take that to the lender reviews it. And then if they like it, then they'll approve it. So it's like nothing came out of my
Hmm.
pocket for it, which is why you
Yeah,
could afford somebody that costs more but gets the job done on time.
gotcha. Okay.
Make
So
sense?
getting creative with those lending opportunities to where you're gonna pay a premium, but it's not coming out on you, and you're kind of building in the numbers to where it will still work for the project that's at hand.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
then all you're basically doing is now you got to find a deal where, it
Hmm.
works. So if it
Yeah.
doesn't work where you're financing something, then you don't take on the deal.
Hmm. Gotcha. So this deal you're working on right now, how'd you find that one?
So how did we find? I had a member at one of my gyms that came up to me and said, "Hey, we have this building downtown. Like the owner of my company has this building, and he's looking at selling it because we never use it. Nobody really ever comes in the office anymore." And
Hmm.
he's like, "Do you want to talk with him, and I can make an introduction, and you can meet him?" So I did, and it's like right downtown, heart of the city. It's basically like an empty shell inside. It's 3 stories, super super nice, like a full
Hmm.
basement, full 10-foot like ceiling basement.
Okay.
And I walked the property, and I was like, "Holy smokes!" And of course, I like start putting a number in my head of like where I think it would be at, and the sale price came in like way under like what he was actually asking for. It was like four hundred
Hmm.
thousand under what I thought it was going to be,
Hmm.
and so I was kind of curious about it and ended up walking it with a contractor. And sure enough, he's like, "Yeah, I don't see anything that would like come out as like strikingly problematic." So he's like, "It
Hmm.
might be just like it might be a good deal." So um, when we started running the numbers and seeing what we wanted to do with the space, that's when it's like, okay, this is why it's priced where it is because it's gonna need a lot of money to actually
Hmm.
make it something that a tenant is gonna rent out. But I mean, those deals don't always come around that often. And when they do, like this is a property that in 5 years, is going to be multi-million-dollar piece of real estate. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
maybe we take the bullet and let's make something happen with this.
Mm-hmm. So what's your goal and what you're going to turn it into?
So I've brought in a partner. So this is like one of the first times I've really like done a partner deal, and I love it. It's
Mm-hmm.
super awesome. Basically, like the partner I have on the deal is very experienced in like the restaurant space, so
Okay.
he knows restaurants and hospitality and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I approached him and I said, "Hey, I think the basement would be a fantastic speakeasy. I think
Mm-hmm.
for the street level, like we could do some sort of cafe or restaurant, and then the top 2 stories we could do maybe like office spaces or an Airbnb or whatever."
Mm-hmm.
Um, so he walked it and he's like, "Yeah, I love it. I want to be a part of this." So
Mm-hmm.
he, of course, then brings in the connections he has for the funding.
Yeah.
So he's like, "Hey, I've got these people
Okay.
that would love to get in on a deal too." So you basically just sell equity for the people that want to be a part of it, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how we did all of our fundraising for the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
I think what we'll do is a speakeasy, and it's gonna be like a cafe type, coffee shop, restaurant type thing on the street
Mm-hmm.
level and second story, and then the third floor is gonna be like an office suite
Mm-hmm. What part of town is this in? Like you said downtown, but like what streets?
downtown. So you know where Phantom Canyon is? It shares the
Yeah.
east wall with Phantom Canyon.
Ah, okay, okay. I gotcha. That is an awesome
Yeah,
spot. It's a great
it's a
location,
great
yeah.
spot.
So what's the timeline for when this is going to be finished and have you started rehab on it and where are you at in that process?
Yeah, so we are still in the I have all the blueprints and stuff, which is kind of cool now, getting to see like what the renderings and stuff look like. But
Mm-hmm.
we are when did we close on this thing? Back in July or so. So we're about 6 months, almost 6 months into this. And
Mm-hmm.
we've got basically all the baseline stuff ready and everything's submitted to the city. So we're just kind of waiting like city comments from each department. And then once we get those back, we'll start fixing it. But
Mm-hmm.
from the date of purchase, I was telling like our partners 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had at the time just gone through this other 4 unit property that I was working on that was planned on being like an 8 month project and ended up being like a 22-month project.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of permitting and stuff that really held us back. But because of all that and all those delays, I'm like, hey guys, this thing is going to be, don't plan 2 years, don't expect a dime for anything for at least 2 years. So
Mm-hmm.
I've given us enough time, but I think 18 months, 19 months is going to be like what I'm suspecting for the target. But my partner really, he thinks this time next year, like it'll be full operation, like it'll be running.
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. Huh. And well, I mean,
yeah,
he has the specialties of, the restaurant business and all of that. So
yeah,
he can probably get it up, especially if you're giving him a lot of time ahead, he can start putting pieces together and then it's just the construction at that point.
yep, yeah. The
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing is going to be the permits. That's always
Mm-hmm.
like what takes the longest. Once you have the budget and you have the construction crews and the teams and everything all figured out, everything from there is quick.
Mm-hmm.
But it's those permits, man. Some like just working with government employees and like they don't care about your budget and they just will sit
Mm-hmm.
there and drain your bank account and they have no regard for anything and they would just sit there and wait on it. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
dude, it takes so much time and money. So that's the longest part for this whole thing
Mm-hmm.
is getting all the comments back.
You sound like you've learned a thing or two on a personal experience with these permits. You have any
Oh
advice
man.
for anyone?
Well, so okay, so here's something that's kind of interesting. So so the crew that I work with now, they not only do they do the renovation, they like GC the project and they make sure all the renovations and construction and all that stuff is done properly, but they
Mm-hmm.
also will run the permitting and the plans and the drawings, right? So they do the whole planning
Okay.
and development side as well. So
Mm-hmm.
he's got an engineer in house, an architect in house. They do
Mm-hmm.
all the research stuff with the city. They do all the back and forth with any comments, any subs, and the subcontractors and stuff have to do anything. They'll handle all that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice being able to have somebody who like their full-time thing is focusing on comments that they get back from the city and making sure each one of them gets
Mm-hmm.
addressed and make sure that the
Okay.
architect is fixing the different components that he has to address also
Hmm.
tying in the engineer. So it's like they're getting all these different things fixed and sorted out together so it can be as quick as possible and then back out to the city for approval. So it's like
Hmm. Okay.
having somebody who's almost an expert in that space is
Hmm.
nice, because if I was trying to figure that out on my own,
Yeah. Hmm.
we'd triple the time, right?
Yeah. And then you also are focusing on all the other things and making sure other stuff goes right, managing your GC and all that stuff. So that I can see how that would definitely play a huge factor in.
Oh yeah, huge. So I huge recommendation. If you find somebody that does that, that's like one of those people you keep around for a long time, just because they can save you thousands of dollars on getting the
Hmm.
project done and started quicker.
Hmm. So how did F45 kind of start up and have a play in here in the middle of your real estate journey?
So real estate's slow. It's not always quick. Very, very big moves, but very slow moves. Like, I mean, the stuff is like, right, when you submit all your permits to the city, it takes months. So it's like, what are you going to do
Hmm.
in the meantime? Um,
Yeah.
I had, for anybody that doesn't know, I had an Airbnb management company that I started and grew based off that one property I had.
Hmm.
Um, Not really knowing what I was doing, had no idea how to run a business, didn't know how to pay employees, didn't know anything about business.
Hmm.
I was a government employee in the military. I thought everybody had a salary. I had no idea how to pay people hourly. Like, it was just a
Hmm.
colossal mess. But I ended up growing this business. I had about 34 clients at its peak, and then I sold that company. So I
Hmm.
had some stuff with some employees that like we couldn't support. Basically, I was overpaying some people, and I
Hmm.
hired a lot of virtual people, and I needed
Hmm.
more local support. So
Hmm.
I ended up being the one person that was local, which, as the owner, especially if you're not taking a paycheck, kind of adds up a lot, like really
Hmm.
quickly. So I was running around fixing light bulbs, changing door locks, like
Hmm.
dealing with all these problems myself. And the people that I hired that should be doing it, like, couldn't, because they weren't local. So
Okay.
I was overpaying quite a bit, especially knowing what I know now. I was
Hmm.
overpaying like insane amount. I mean, I have people that I can pay 20. I have VAs that I can pay $5 an hour, and the amount of work that these guys get done is
Hmm.
unreal compared to somebody that I was paying $3,600 a month. And this
Hmm.
guy, we'd catch him sleeping in the car in his truck, So it's
Oh
like
my. Yeah. Huh.
the amount of work, like the things I know now are just colossally different. So I ended up selling that Airbnb management company,
Hmm.
and to another local company that was doing the same kind of thing.
Hmm.
But sold that, and then I guess like word got out to this gym that I was going to, and the owner was kind of done. She was frustrated and kind of at her
Hmm.
wits' end, and she's like, "Hey, I'm thinking about selling my gyms. Like, is this something you'd want to get into?" And
Hmm.
I didn't know any better, and I was like, I don't know anything about running a gym, but I kind of realized that you're never gonna know until you just do it.
Hmm.
So that's where that came from. It was two distressed studios that were a part of the deal. I didn't bring
Hmm.
any cash to close. The seller was giving me $50,000, which was like 2 months worth of operating capital,
Hmm.
and then I just assumed all of their debts. So
Okay.
all of the seller debt got transferred over to me.
Hmm.
Um, Looking back at it, it wasn't a terrible deal, but it
Hmm.
wasn't a great deal either. Knowing where I'm at today,
Hmm.
I wouldn't have done it for the same price. I still probably would have done it, just not for that price. But
Hmm.
that's kind of that's kind of how I got started in the gym slash like business space. I kind of see
Hmm.
it's an interesting transition, but um, I see my knowledge being more in the aspect of like now I understand like business way better, and I know how to
Hmm.
run businesses.
Yeah.
So it's definitely like a very valuable transition.
Hmm. What do you think was the best lesson from the Airbnb business that transferred over into gyms that helped out a ton for, you're basically starting fresh and not knowing anything about each of those businesses?
Yeah. So there's a great one, and I was just talking about this earlier today, but one of the toughest things is if you have a business or you have something and it's not, I don't think a lot of people like know this, but if it's not doing well, and it's going to seem like common sense, but it's like when you're in the position, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
When you have something and it's not doing well, a lot of times what needs to happen is it needs to die or you need to kill it off.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of letting that happen, what you'll do is you'll look at your bank account and be like, I can help it just this once. And
Mm-hmm.
then I can do it one more time because it'll get better. And then you do it again and it's going to come back. And then before you know it, you're 50, 60, $70,000 in the hole, right? And it just
Mm-hmm.
keeps adding up and you're not actually fixing any of the problems. Um, like for example, if you have an employee who you should be paying $500 a month for that role for to get the tasks done that job needs accomplished,
Mm-hmm.
you could get that done for $500 a month. However, you're paying $3,600 a month,
Mm-hmm.
right? Big differential. And the business can only support the $500 a month, but you don't realize
Mm-hmm.
it because maybe the business has big cash influx. So like maybe you started off really strong, or it's actually like cash flowing super well, but you're not building like a strong foundation. So you
Mm-hmm.
make these really poor like hiring decisions based
Mm-hmm.
on how much capital you have. And
Yeah.
the lesson that I've taken away from it is just knowing like, okay, you're paying based on what the job is and what the duties can be accomplished for,
Mm-hmm.
not what you can afford. Like we
Mm-hmm.
could at the time, right? We could afford $3,600 a month, but that's not what the job required.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
just learning how to, if something is broken, don't fix it with your own pocket. Let the
Mm-hmm.
business fix it. And the business, if the business can't fix it on its own, it has to like that part has to fail. Otherwise it'll
Mm-hmm.
never get fixed.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of that like with these gyms. So I've been offered to own 7 different F45s here in Colorado. I've
Mm-hmm.
had 7 different opportunities. I've said no to what, 4 of them. 3 I
Mm-hmm.
ended up picking up.
Mm-hmm.
But one
So
thing
how
that I
many gyms
noticed,
total do you have?
so I have 2 now. I
Oh,
had
okay.
3 at one
Two.
point. I have 2 now. Yeah.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
So one thing that I noticed as a commonality
Mm-hmm.
between these 7 different gyms is every single one of them, like the owner was
Mm-hmm.
contributing to the business every month, which means the
Mm-hmm.
business essentially was suffering a loss that couldn't be supported
Yeah.
by the business itself, by the revenue it brought in.
Mm-hmm.
And when you peel back the onion and you start looking at things, it's like, okay, so you have 2 salaried employees that are trainers that you're paying 7 grand a month each to, and the
Mm-hmm.
business is only making $15,000 a month in revenue. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't afford that. Those people have to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a super valuable lesson that again I don't think a lot of people know, or it takes a lot, like a really painful lesson to learn it. But coming from that Airbnb management company, learning like, hey, if something's broken, it has to die. Let it die so you can fix it, and then actually doing it the right way. That's
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the toughest things to do because generally it's like somebody's job that you're talking about, or
Mm-hmm.
a client, or people, and they're the money that they paid or something for it. But if it's not working, like we had a gym that was just upside down. The amount of rent was extraordinarily high compared to how much revenue that the business made, and it could never
Mm-hmm.
get out from underneath itself.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually got to the point where it's like either we can support it with one of the other gyms, but then like that one's going to eventually go down,
Mm-hmm.
or we can let it die off and just go out of business, and then have 2 really healthy gyms and like have these ones
Mm-hmm.
do really well.
Yeah.
So we gave it a shot, but eventually it's like, don't put any money into this. Don't pull any money
Mm-hmm.
from any other gyms. Let it be
Mm-hmm.
its own thing. And if it goes under, it goes under, and people will be upset. And, people are like, jobs are going to have to be lost and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
the other option is like, you go bankrupt,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and like your personal sanity and like everything in your life goes under. And I can tell you right now, those people, those members, those clients, those employees, they wouldn't do the same thing for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what I
Yeah.
kind of try to remind myself. I'm like, hey, there's no client that's going to go out here and go 300 grand in the hole for you so you can stay afloat.
Mm-hmm.
No
Yeah.
employee is going to go pull a $30,000 loan and give it to you so that you can stay afloat. So why are you doing it for them?
Mm-hmm. That's a good
Right.
lesson to be
It's
applied to
tough.
all businesses and real estate too. It's kind of the same way of looking at it because real estate is still a business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really tough one to learn, and it's a tough one I think to stick by, but it's kind of just how I remind myself. I'm like, hey, these guys, like, why are you sitting here dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into a business that's failing just to like keep
Mm-hmm.
other people happy when if you turn the
Yeah.
table around, they wouldn't do the same thing for you, man.
Mm-hmm. So that's what happened for you had three, you kind of let that happen to the third one so you could focus on just the two.
Yeah. So two of them had, um, they had better expenses. So like the
Mm-hmm.
expense to income ratio was like way better, and
Mm-hmm.
the rent wasn't as egregious. So just understanding kind of like the situation of the two gyms and stuff, I'm like, these two will be successful if I let this third one die.
Mm-hmm.
As long as that one
Okay.
dies, then they won't have to support it, which will let them flourish and do well.
Uh-huh. So what happens when you just let it die? You just fire everyone and just stop paying rent and just you're done, you walk out, or what's that process like?
Yeah, so that's a good question too. There's a lot of good questions in here because there's a difference, and I've learned this too. There's a difference in going like taking a business and putting it into bankruptcy
Mm-hmm.
than there is with just like letting it go out of business. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say the biggest thing is like when you do when you let a business go out of business, what you're doing is the income, you're essentially like cutting off the income stream, and the expenses kind of just like eat away at whatever there is until the expenses can't eat at anything else, and then it's just like
Mm-hmm.
it's all empty. So
Yeah.
we had a I was very lucky that we had a lease or like lease deadline coming up, and
Mm-hmm.
the option to renew was coming up, and I made the
Oh, okay.
decision. Yeah, so I made the
That's
decision.
good.
I asked some people. I have, I hired a private like performance manager team into my business, and basically asked them because they've done this before, right? They've all started businesses, they've built them, they've sold the gyms, right? They're specific kind of like to the gym industry,
Mm-hmm.
but so they've done this before. And I asked them, I'm like, what do I do? Like, I got this lease coming up. Do I need to renew? What? And they're like, no, like just close it, close the gym. If the
Mm-hmm.
lease is coming due and it's already going to be that expensive and these are already your problems, don't sign another 5-year lease. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to get better.
Yeah.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky that it was coming up. So what we did was we just let, when the lease came due, we essentially had enough in the account to pay any of the late rent that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to sell, we sold all the equipment. We sold all like floor mats, speakers on the walls, like
Mm-hmm.
weights.
Everything.
We sold everything we could. And that gave us enough money to pay payroll, pay the landlord, and then pay the bank. We had a credit card that
Mm-hmm.
was like our kind of only loan with that entity, and we were able to pay the bank off. So like we got all the things that we were required to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the tough thing was is like there was some members that like didn't want they wanted refunds on their memberships because they had like paid
Mm-hmm.
for months in advance and stuff.
Yeah.
But that gets into an interesting situation because this is I guess a little bit of this is what I experienced. But I had a bankruptcy attorney who I sat down with, and he basically told me, he's like, no, you've set everything up the right way. You've got it. It's a different entity. They're all separated, so they're all independent.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, basically, the business has no money to give refunds. Now, if it had income, you can take the income and you can give refunds and you can make everybody whole, but you're not
Mm-hmm.
obligated to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't have a contract that ties you into it. So it's only
Mm-hmm.
tied to the entity. So
Gotcha.
you don't have to pay those back, which is never the goal. But again, it's like one of those things. What do I do in this situation? Like, I don't have the money. The business doesn't have the
Mm-hmm.
money. Where does the money come from? And it's like, if a business goes under, that's kind of like one of the tough things that you have to do. You're going to get called names. You're going to get harassing emails. You're going to get death threats and phone calls and all this stuff, which happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough personally, I think, to deal with a lot of that stuff. But it's like one of those things that if we would have let it die earlier, then I would have been
Mm-hmm.
on the hook for a lot more,
Yeah.
and none of these people would have cared.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have to. I just tie myself back to that. Like, hey, none of these people are going to put their necks out for you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't put yourself in the hole just so they can get their last month or two of a membership.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up doing on that was we said, hey, your membership's still active. These other gyms agreed to allow you to still come and use it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah. Okay.
people still aren't always happy with that.
Yeah. So when you were, well, I got two more questions for you. When you
Yeah.
were about when you were given the opportunity to go to those first couple gyms and
Mhm.
you analyzed the deal, what like purpose or a problem did you see that you could solve to make it a better gym for when you took it over?
So the first two, so the first deal I did was for two, and then the second one I did was just for one studio.
Hmm.
When I first looked at the first studio, I kind of like didn't know. I was like, I'm passionate and I like the gym, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
do it. You know, I, which are terrible reasons, but sometimes you need an idiot like that that'll come in and do that and is willing
Hmm.
to kind of do whatever it takes.
Hmm.
Um, I I just wrote an email actually kind of explaining this whole thing, but I came in not knowing what to do. And typically, as part of a franchise, the franchise is supposed to have like an onboarding sequence of like, here's the
Hmm.
things you need to learn. Here's how to run a business like seminar. Like, here's all the things you're supposed to learn. And I didn't get any of that stuff. So I
Hmm.
was really just trying to figure this out on my own. And
Hmm.
I think that's where like the tough lessons never would have been learned if I had like deep pockets and I was able to just shovel
Yeah.
money into it. Then you would never have to solve the problems. But
Hmm.
like we had trainers getting overpaid. We had trainers on salary that never should have been on salary. Like,
Hmm.
things like that. The pay was like extraordinarily high. Um, what else did we have? We had some like membership pricing was like so it was so low it was like unsustainable. So like
Hmm.
that's a problem, right? Is learning like how much
Yeah.
to charge people because if you
Hmm.
don't know how to charge people, all of a sudden you're getting 20, $30,000 in your bank account every month, and you're like, oh, this is fantastic. But like your
Hmm.
expenses are 40 grand, so you're just seeing a
Yeah.
deficit every month, right? So it's like if you've never seen it before, it's tough and you don't know.
Yeah.
And if you don't have somebody coaching you, there's really no way to learn other than to like pay for these expensive lessons. But
For
I had no idea.
for the price of what you charge for a membership, when I think of like what I charge for rents for a rental property, I'll look at comps to see, okay, this is what it's going like in this area, this is what I can charge. Do
Mhm.
you do that the same type of thing with a gym membership, or do amenities come into play more for that, or how's that? What's your mindset and thought process behind that?
Yeah, so there's a funny quote that I listen to a lot. Alex Hormozy is kind of like the
I was gonna
mentor in the
ask you.
gym space.
I like
Yeah,
him. He's got a lot of good stuff.
he's really really good, and he's passionate about business, and that's what I really enjoy too. So it's fun listening to
Hmm.
him and kind of like hearing the different things. But there's something he says about this, and it's what I think of when people ask me kind of like the question you did, and it's like, okay, so do you look at like what other gyms are charging? And it's like, yeah, I do. But there's one problem with that in the real estate space, right? Everybody that owns real estate, like they're paying like their mortgage. And you kind of look
Hmm.
around for comps and you're like, okay, if I can charge what they're charging and still pay my mortgage, then I'm good. Like I can do
Hmm.
that. So like it makes sense, right? You're not gonna like go out of business just because you're not charging enough. But
Yeah.
the problem with the gym space and businesses, kind of like in general, but the gym space specifically, all gym owners are broke.
Hmm.
So if I'm looking at them for my comps, then I'm going to be asking for the same life they have, which is not a
Yeah.
profitable gym, not a nice
Hmm.
place, not new equipment, not, top tier coaches. So it's like
Hmm.
I can and you could, but if you do that, you're going to end up like every other gym, which we've had three or four major gyms close here in the last like 3 months. So it's like,
Hmm.
why am I still open when they're not? It's like
Yeah.
maybe there is something I'm doing right.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good little note. I like that.
Yeah, it's different, it's a different game, and I think that's probably why it's so exciting to me is because
Hmm.
it's not it's not the same lessons. It's not the same way to learn the same lessons. You have to learn
Hmm.
things in a different way, and they all apply in different mechanics and stuff. And
Hmm.
sure, you can go to other people for their comps, but in this world, if you do that, you're going to be broke, and you're probably going to go out
Hmm.
of business.
Hmm. So if you were to start over, would you start with real estate or start with business again?
Ooh, interesting. Like if I lost everything and had to start everything all over again, where would you
Yeah.
go?
Hmm.
Well, I think so. I'd have to start with business just because I think like in order to start with real estate, I'd need something. Um,
Hmm.
the only way I would start in real estate again is if I came across a deal or something to where um, somebody needed the expertise that I had, and I could do that, right? If I was on a
Hmm.
construction team or got something like that going. But where I'm at right now, I feel like I know enough about business to where, for example, let's just say I came in on a gym, got a space and came in on a gym. I could
Hmm.
turn that gym into a pretty profitable business within 6 months,
Hmm.
and then from there I'd be able to start and launch into, buying real estate and stuff again. So it's like,
Yeah.
I think real estate, tying it back to like one of your first questions of being like, where is real estate in the portfolio? I think it's the piece of the portfolio where you build up, build up, build up, buy something. Then you build up,
Hmm.
build up, build up, buy something, and it just kind of like keeps that.
Hmm.
Whereas business is like your growth opportunity. It's like,
Hmm.
boom, okay, we're here. Now let's take a little bit of that, put it here. Let's take the next chunk and buy into this. And then you grow that. And then it's like, okay,
Hmm.
take that chunk, buy another piece of real
Yeah.
estate, take whatever's left over and buy the next one.
Hmm. Awesome. Dang.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone has any questions, where can they reach out to you to kind of learn more about gyms or any real estate stuff?
Yeah. So I think my Twitter is the same as my Instagram, but Instagram is just the Josh Kolnitys.
Hmm.
Kolnitys is my last name. So that's probably like the easiest way just to get in touch.
Hmm.
They're on Twitter, and
Hmm.
from there, slide into the DMs and we can have a conversation from there. You can always reach out to one of our local F45s and just be like, hey, I want to get in touch with Josh, and shoot a text message to the studio, and that'll always get back to me for sure.
Hmm. Awesome. Sweet. Thanks so much, Josh.
Yeah.
I learned a ton, and I want to get you back on to hear about this commercial deal to see if it's up and running by this time next year.
Yeah.
That'd be sweet.
Yeah. It'll be super cool.